City Clerk Kevin Christian, will you please call roll?
Commissioner Hopkins.
Here.
Commissioner Khan is absent. Commissioner Quincy.
Here.
Commissioner Shoresman.
Here.
Commissioner Wolken.
Here.
Vice Chair Jorgensen.
Here.
Chair Dandekar.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. Thank you. Let the record reflect that commissioners are present through teleconferencing. I'd like to remind my fellow commissioners and staff to help us reduce background noise by muting your phone and microphone unless you're speaking. Commissioner Hopkins will lead us through the Pledge of Allegiance today.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. If anybody has comments on the minutes, that's our first agenda item, is the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Commission, March 10th, 2021. If anybody has comments on the minute, please unmute your microphone and identify yourself.
Yeah, Chair Dandekar, this is Mike Wolken. I have a comment on the minutes for the Lausanne Rail Facility. It's on packet page 3, and under one of the comments or suggestions for the project description, there's one more item that should be included, and that is another bullet that says the design of all the buildings should be part of the project description.
Thank you for that. Were there any other additions?
I had one comment, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't seem to find it right this minute, but the roundhouse was mentioned, and there was a comment that it ought to be preserved, but the roundhouse doesn't exist except for kind of some change in gravel on the ground. I mean, so let me just see if I can find that real quickly. Sorry.
Commissioner Jorgensen, I think that it says preservation of historic roundhouse and visibility used by citizens. That's the comment.
Well, maybe
There's
that's
an interest
the same.
or something.
Just I read it and thought, gee, they think there's still a building there, but there certainly isn't.
I guess when I read that, I just assumed that it was referring to the remnants of the roundhouse that are there, and the mention in the project presentation that we heard that there was plan for, or that there was proposals to have educational signage and visibility of that spot for people used by citizens.
Well, that's fine then. Thank you.
Would you like to add interpretive elements of the roundhouse, and because
or clarify that somehow, maybe?
Sure.
should we add?
This is Deputy Clerk Christian. I think that Commissioner Shoresman she used the term remnants. I could easily just insert that after roundhouse, so it would read preservation of historic roundhouse remnants and visibility / use by citizens. I'm reluctant to add the other term having to do with interpretive elements because I don't recall that being part of the discussion.
That's fine.
Seems like a good solution.
Yeah. Are there any other changes to the minutes? Seeing none, we have 2 additions, which you have noted, right? So if I could have a motion and second to approve the minutes with the 2 additions. Do I have a motion?
I'll move approval.
Is that Michael?
That's Nick Quincy.
Oh, I can't see you, Nick. Sorry.
No problem.
Commissioner Quincy makes the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Wilkins seconds. Will the Deputy City Clerk please call the roll of the motion?
Commissioner Quincy,
Yes.
Commissioner Wolkin,
Yes.
Commissioner Hopkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Shoresman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jorgensen,
Yes.
Chair Dondekar.
Yes.
Motion passes.
At this time, we will hear any public comments for items not on tonight's agenda. Items raised are generally referred to staff, and if action by the Commission is necessary, may be scheduled for a future meeting. Please follow the instructions on the screen. Once public comments for the item is opened, your microphone will be unmuted and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Deputy City Clerk, do we have any public comments?
We have no public comments for items not on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Any court challenges to the actions taken on public hearing items on this agenda may be limited to considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the City of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Consultant and project presentations are limited to 6 minutes. The second public hearing item before us is to review a project located at 3985 Broad Street. I'd like to ask each planning commissioner for their ex parte disclosures of contact with anyone who has provided information to the planning commissioners not on the record, so that information may be used as part of their decision-making process. Are there any ex parte disclosures?
Hello, Chair Dondekar. I don't have any disclosures to make, but I would like to recuse myself from this item as the applicant is a board member for my employer, People Self-Help Housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in, Commissioner Hopkins. Are there any other ex parte disclosures? I see no hands up. So could Senior Planner Brian Lavelle and Contract Planner Brandy Cummings please present the report?
Good evening, this is Brandy Cummings. Clerk, may I request permission to share my screen, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. There we go. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes, thank you.
All right, perfect. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Brandy Cummings. I'm a contract planner with SWCA and the city's contract planner for this project. And this is the Northwest Corner Commercial Center. Staff's recommendation tonight on this item is that your commission approve the project as outlined in the resolution that was attached with your staff report. The project tonight is a request for a development plan for a commercial center. It's actually the commercial center component of the larger Northwest Corner project. The other component being previously approved, located on the western portion of the site, was an assisted living facility. So this commercial center will be located on the eastern portion of the site, and it's part of a approved tract map that was approved at the end of last year. Project site's in the airport area specific plan, and it's zoned for community commercial uses. It also has a special focus area overlay. As you might have guessed from the project name, it's at the corner of Broad Street and Tank Farm. So the Marigold Center is located to the east, Cesslock is to the north, and then Mindbody and the Edna Valley Market Center is located to the south. And then you can't tell from this graphic, but as I mentioned, there is an approved assisted living facility that's undergoing construction document approval. So tonight, the Planning Commission's focus is on the architecture and the site plan aspects of the project. As I mentioned, this project is part of a site that already has an approved tract map. So there are certain aspects related to previous approvals that are not open for discussion tonight. So for instance, we can't relocate access or change any of the tract improvements that have previously been approved. And this project might look familiar to some of you on the commission. You have seen a previous version a couple years ago. Back in 2018, the applicant applied for an assisted living facility and grocery store shopping center project. That project included a zone change and a tract map. It was reviewed by ARC and your commission in 2019, along with an environmental document. Your commission recommended approval, and the city council held their first hearing also in 2019. However, a second hearing on that project did not occur, and the environmental document was not approved. It went on hold for several months, and then in early 2020, the applicant revised the project and elected to move forward with just the assisted living facility component, along with the zone change and the tract map. And noted that they would come back at a later time for the commercial center project, which is what we're discussing tonight. There weren't any changes proposed at that time to the assisted living facilities, so that project and the zone change on the tract map proceeded with final city council approval, and that was last September. At that time, the city council also approved the environmental document relative to the project, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, but that environmental document did conceptually analyze this project as well. And then earlier this year, when the commercial center component came in, that project did go to the Airport Land Use Commission for review, and just a couple of weeks ago to Architectural Review Commission. It may be a little difficult to tell from this slide, but the revised project includes replacing the originally proposed grocery store use with a medical office, and then rearrangement and site configuration to the rest of the shopping uses, so retail and restaurant type uses. Now, although the tract map and access improvements have already been approved through the map process, I thought it might be helpful to show the access and circulation of the site, just so you can see how it connects with other development in the area. I know this side of town, that's always an issue that I like to discuss. So the airport area specific plan and the special focus overlay that apply to the site place a lot of emphasis on pedestrian connectivity. So you can see from the site plan in pink, the overall Northwest Corner project, which includes, the assisted living facility, includes Creek Walk. There'll be connection across to the 650 Tank Farm project, which is a previously approved project under construction. There will be a separated and elevated bike path along both project frontages. The existing Cesslock driveway will be closed off and relocated south, so it'll be consolidated with this driveway, so there won't be two double driveways stacked up. There'll also be access through the rear of Cesslock, which ultimately connects with Industrial Way over on the other end of Broad. And then there'll be a new access at the Mindbody signalized intersection. Now, you may remember last year when we were discussing 650 Tank Farm, Luke provided a pretty thorough overview of kind of all the circulation improvements that are going on in this part of town with all the projects. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Luke. He's going to give just a brief refresher, just so we're all on the same page with how the circulation works over here.
Yeah, thank you, Brandy, and good evening, commissioners. So it's important to understand the circulation, not just for this site in isolation, but also with the relationship to the adjacent developments just to the west at 650 Tank Farm and at 600 Tank Farm, a little further to the west of that, which is still under environmental review. So as you can see, these are all adjacent to each other all along the Tank Farm corridor. So we're looking at these holistically. And I can kind of give you an overview of how the circulation is planned for the frontage of this tract and then throughout the Tank Farm corridor and at the intersection of Tank Farm and Broad. Next slide, please. So first, we're talking about motor vehicle circulation. So the project would be improving the existing signalized intersection near Mine Body to provide a new north leg, which would serve as primary access from Tank Farm to the site. It would also have two-way or right-in, right-out driveway along Tank Farm and along the Broad Street frontage, as well as connecting internally north to the Cesslock property and ultimately up to the Industrial Way intersection. And to the west, you'd have driveways, access restricted driveways for the other two developments. And then ultimately a new roundabout is proposed at the intersection of Santa Fe, realigning to a new intersection with Santa Fe and Tank Farm Road. So you'd have vehicular connectivity between this site and the adjacent neighbor 650 Tank Farm to the west, as well as to the rest of the adjacent arterial streets at Broad and Tank Farm, with full access via signalized access at those intersections you see on the map. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at the bicycle circulation. We work closely with the applicant as we had the now updated and approved active transportation plan. As that was in progress, we worked with the applicant team closely to make sure that the improvements were consistent with what we were planning for in the active transportation plan. So this project is the track map includes conditions requiring them to be constructing sidewalk level elevated protected bike lanes along both the Broad Street frontage and along the Tank Farm Road frontage, with a similar requirement for the adjacent properties as they develop to the west. So you have continuous elevated protected bike lanes along the portion of Broad Street that the project fronts, as well as along this whole stretch of Tank Farm Road. In addition, there's a requirement for the project to reconstruct the corner of the existing intersection at Broad and Tank Farm with features of a protected intersection. It's essentially kind of a more innovative way to design a signalized intersection that improves both comfort and safety for both bicyclists and pedestrians crossing the intersection. It particularly helps with bicyclists making left turns. And so the idea is in the long term, we'd be building out the remainder of the intersection to have complete protected corners on all quadrants of the intersection. Excuse me, but this development would be constructing their frontage to work towards that as a long-term, really nice protected intersection throughout. In addition, there's shared streets internally that provides connectivity for pedestrians and bicyclists between this project, the neighbor to the west at 650 Tank Farm, and then ultimately via a bridge providing bike, pedestrian, and emergency access only across the creek to the 600 Tank Farm on the westernmost portion of the map that you see here. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this shows the pedestrian connectivity. So right now there's no pedestrian infrastructure along the frontage of this site. The map approval includes conditions to reconstruct the frontages and include sidewalks along the whole project frontage, which would continue along the developments to the west along Tank Farm, as well as widening Tank Farm to provide width for 2 lanes throughout along the westbound direction. And there'd be pedestrian connectivity internal to the sites as well, both to the north up to the David Garcia Sports Field and to the Industrial Way connection, as well as west between the sites along a bridge, or a culvert connecting this site to 650 Tank Farm, and then again internally between 650 Tank Farm and 660 Tank Farm. So for folks that live and are walking to the retail or other destinations, they could avoid the busier arterial streets if they need. And this would connect as well to sidewalks or pathways along both sides of the creek in the long term, which provides a nice amenity for connectivity for pedestrians, walking for recreation and for transportation purposes. So that's the general overview of how circulation is planned for this site and within the vicinity. Thanks.
Thanks, Luke. So that was a lot of history, but the project has changed quite a bit since your commission last saw it. So I think it was relevant. But now how about I tell you about the project in front of us today. So this is the Commercial Center project. It's on about 5¼ acres. As I mentioned, it's the eastern part of the Northwest Corners site. It's designated and zoned for community commercial, and it does have the special focus overlay. Now, the development plan is proposing a medical office, just under 47,000 square feet. It would be 3 stories. It's tentatively slated for an integrated cancer care center. And then there would be 3 5,000 square foot buildings, so 15,000 square feet total, which would be used for retail, restaurant, office, other shopping type uses. And those buildings are 1-story structures. You can see generally the project's configured with buildings providing a strong presence along the frontage and parking kind of tucked around to the back, which makes the site a bit more pedestrian friendly as you're traveling from other destinations in the area on foot. There would be short-term and long-term parking facilities associated with each building, and then the applicant has included electric vehicle charging stations, and those are scattered throughout the parking field there. This is a rendering of the medical office building. So this is looking south along Broad Street. The design of this building is more of a contemporary style building. You can see there's a significant amount of glass being used, along with recessing to provide some shadows and shading, cantilevered overhangs, and different styles of glazing along the glass facade along Broad Street. You can't see it on this rendering, but on one of the future slides, you'll see there's a living wall along the radiation vault, which is complementary to the sound wall along the garden area. And again, I'll point that out when we get to that slide. And then, color-wise, we're looking at neutral earth tone colors, kind of complement some of the other buildings in this airport area, specific plan area. Now, this is looking at the intersection north at the Broad Street Tank Farm intersection, looking northwest. You can see the retail buildings in the front and the medical office tucked to the back. Again, this is also contemporary style architecture, but complementary but not matchy to the medical office. You can see it includes some metal parapets and overhangs, some canopies and eaves and trellises, and then also using those earth tones, grays and beiges and blues. And then this would be looking internal on the site. So if you were at the assisted living facility, looking northeast, this is what you would, southeast. This is what you would be seeing. The applicant has proposed a master sign program for consideration to sort of establish a uniform sign design for the site. The sign program does propose 3 monument signs. 2 of them would be on Broad Street. You can see those in this rendering. And then there would be 1 additional on Tank Farm. And then wall-mounted signs for each of the tenant spaces. As detailed in Table 1 of your agenda report, the project complies with and is consistent with the various city policies and regulations, along with the parameters and conditions set out by the airport land use plan. Now, the project does exceed the height standard for community commercial designation. However, the applicant's requesting a minor deviation in this height to accommodate the different design parameters of the medical office building. So I should point out this is just for the medical office building. And this isn't how you would normally see a height request. It's not an exception or a variance. This is a different process that's afforded by the designation of the special focus overlay. And so what this overlay does is it provides flexibility and discretion to your commission to approve various deviations from the requirements of the underlying zone in order to help achieve the development objectives that are described for the site in the special focus area. So the special focus area design objectives for this site include a mixed use site with a strong commercial presence, and then mirroring the language of the airport area specific plan, there's a strong focus on connectivity and access and safety and comfort for bicyclists and pedestrians in the area. So the special focus overlay is intended to give the Planning Commission discretion. And so asking the question, does the project achieve these objectives that are laid out that I just went over? One thing I would note is at the time the land use element was adopted, the site was designated business professional, which is similar to the Cesslock building to the north and Mindbody to the south. And so that designation has a 45-foot height limit, and it allows for projections up to 52 feet. And now the site was rezoned, as I mentioned, by the council, and that was really meant to allow for a wider range of shopping uses in the shopping center. It wasn't really intended to further restrict the building and site design options beyond those that were originally envisioned in the land use element for the site. So the applicant is requesting this additional height to achieve a sufficient operational floor area for the medical building within a smaller footprint on the site. And that smaller footprint is what will help enable the connectivity features that are envisioned both for in the specific focus overlay and the airport area specific plan. This slide kind of shows the different heights. So as I mentioned, the community commercial height limits allow occupiable space up to 35 feet. So that's this orange line. With projections up to 45 feet, which is the other orange line. And so the applicant is proposing occupiable area up to 42.5 feet with projections up to 52 feet. You can kind of see in the background, just for scale, the other components of the project are about 26 feet. The height request was reviewed by the Airport Land Use Commission, and they found the height consistent with the airport land use plan. Additionally, the FAA reviewed the height and issued a no hazard determination. So they didn't find an issue regarding airspace safety. The Architectural Review Commission did review the project and the height a couple weeks ago, and they found it consistent with all the various guidelines and policies and standards. They did recommend approval. Along with their approval, they did provide some design considerations to the applicant. Now, these were not included as conditions or requirements. They wanted to leave flexibility to the applicant and the design team to design a project that worked for their vision. But they did provide these as guidance on what they thought would make the project a little better. And let's do these on the next slide. So the first consideration they suggested was removing this sort of black parapet harness on the radiation vault. This is that living wall I mentioned earlier. So you can see the applicant did provide a revised plan that does have that element removed. Basically, the wall is just extended that much higher. My mouse is finished. There we go. Okay, the second item was related to these beige vertical, I don't want to call them pillars, but wall spaces. The ARC recommended providing more articulation or etching just to define those more and break up the appearance of a large blank wall space. So you can see the applicant did go back and provided more articulation in those grooves to kind of help, you know, those squares stand out a little better. And then their third item was regarding the sound wall or a sound wall for this. You can kind of see there's some tables and umbrellas out front. There's a little garden patio area in front of the medical building. So they did suggest providing a sound wall, garden wall that kind of matched the living wall that's proposed on the radiation bulb. You can see the applicants provided revised plans that show that. Now, there was an M&D that was completed last year for the tract, the zone changes, the assisted living facility. It also analyzed this conceptual commercial center. At the time, it wasn't a submitted project yet, but it did take a look at it in the M&D. There have been just a couple minor design changes beyond what was analyzed in that document, and that's relative to the height increase and then a minor increase in floor area on the medical building. And so an addendum was prepared to accompany that environmental document. And again, staff's recommendation is approval for the project, and there are findings and conditions in your resolution. And that concludes staff presentation.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, would you like to ask questions to staff? Let me start just calling on you, Commissioner Quincy.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Shorsman.
Is there an applicant presentation too, or is this the only presentation?
Yes, there is also an applicant presentation.
Okay, I'll just wait then. Thank you.
Commissioner Jorgensen.
Maybe real quickly, I take it that by removing the shopping center, this actually allows the creation of sufficient parking for a medical center, which is a very parking intensive kind of use. Is that pretty much how this plays out then?
Yeah, as proposed, the applicant is meeting the parking requirements for the site.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Commissioner Wilkin.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a couple of questions for staff and also a couple of questions for the applicant later after the applicant's presentation. I think my questions are for Mr. Schwartz, if he's still there. The first one has to do with the grade separated or elevated bicycle lanes. I think, Mr. Schwartz, you mentioned that those bicycle lanes would be, the elevated ones would be continued. And I think you said on Broad, going north on Broad and west on Tank Farm. How far would those be continued?
Sure. So on the Broad Street, the bike lane would essentially allow you to ramp up right at the project frontage. So just south of the new kind of shared Cesslock driveway between Cesslock and this site. And then they would basically ramp kind of back down to grade at the intersection crossing. And the city's long-term plans are to continue implementation of these type of protected bike lanes along the rest of the corridor. But at this time, it would just be along the project frontage on Broad Street. Along Tank Farm, you'd basically ramp up from that corner and be at that elevated level all the way west with the development of each of these individual projects along their frontage to the Santa Fe Tank Farm roundabout. And then the plans between west of there along that middle stretch through the county along the Chevron properties are actually for fully off-street parallel shared use paths. So it'd be used by pedestrians and bikes, but it would be wider and completely set back from the road itself.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any exhibit that shows the transition from the at-grade bicycle lane to the elevated bicycle lane?
I don't know that I have a specific exhibit, but the design would be very similar to what you'd see approaching a roundabout in the city, where you have a ramp that kind of slightly diagonally ramps you up to the sidewalk level, and then you run parallel to the street. So the ramp up to that level would be very similar for the bicyclists.
Okay, so the ramp would go at a diagonal then to get from the street to the kind of the sidewalk area?
Correct. And so on Broad Street, we have enough width that you'd have basically the option, if you're a really comfortable road cyclist, you could just stay along the curbside shoulder, and ultimately the on-street bike lane shifts to the left side of the right turn lane. If you're fast and comfortable riding in traffic, you'd probably take that route. For most others, you'd have the option to ramp up to that sidewalk level, just like you would approaching a roundabout, to where you'd be at a sidewalk level facility similar to this photo.
Okay, all right, thank you. And on one of the plans, I think it was on the site plan, I saw what looked like a center left turn lane on Broad Street that would allow northbound traffic on Broad to make a left turn into the driveway by the Cancer Care Center building. Is that the plan?
Yeah, so there's some detailed conditions approved with the approval of the site as a whole, and if the environmental document in the map that articulated how that would work. Essentially, as designed, the driveway would allow right in and right out, and left turns in, continuing both into this site and to the existing left turn southbound into the Marigold Center, but would not allow left turns out from the site onto northbound Broad.
Okay, but left turn in from northbound on Broad, left turn in is going to be allowed, right?
That would be allowed at this time. A caveat within that condition, though, is that the applicant is also required to include designs for an additional narrow median. We call it like kind of a worm. We have one similar out on Los Osos Valley Road by Old Navy, where it essentially still allows left turns in, but does not allow the left turns out for either directions. And so the condition basically says that from 6 months and 12 months from occupancy of the development, the applicant is responsible for having a traffic consultant monitor the driveway. If there's issues with driver behavior not observing the left turn restrictions or any kind of collision issues, the developer would still be would have to bond for the cost to come back and install additional medians if there's driver compliance issues with the driveway. There were real concerns about completely pulling the left turn access out from the Marigold Center, which exists currently and has been operating without any issues. So there's basically a path forward where we have a driveway design that we think will work acceptably, which restricts the left turns out, which is really where we see most of the safety concerns on busier streets. And if we're seeing driver compliance issues with still trying to go around that without a median or other safety concerns that we have as a city, we still have the ability to require the applicant to come back and add an additional median along the center of Broad Street to physically restrict lefts out from that approach as well.
Okay, would that median then also, if a median is installed, would that restrict left turn in as well?
The plan would not be to restrict the left turns in. We've had less concerns from a collision standpoint, and on our access management standards and our engineering standards do not preclude the ability to allow left turns in like this. It's really the left turns out across a busy street where you have to pass two directions of travel and get a gap and make that more challenging decision where we have more safety concerns.
Okay, all right, thank you. And while we have this landscaping plan up on the screen, down at the very bottom of the landscaping plan, at the bottom of the screen, it shows what looks like 2 rows of street trees, one adjacent to the site and then the other on the outside, well, in between Tank Farm travel lanes and the sidewalk bike lane. Is that what is actually being proposed, that double row of street trees? Or maybe that's not a question for you.
Oh, I can answer what between the sidewalk and bikeway and the street itself is a landscape parkway. We haven't seen the detailed design submittal yet to see if the applicant's proposing street trees or other types of landscaping. Where we do allow street trees like that in the parkway, we need to make sure that we don't have concerns about the roots damaging the sidewalk or it impacting sight lines for at the nearby intersections or driveways. So that's something we look at closely as part of that submittal.
Okay. All right. So it's not definitive yet then on the street trees. So one of the things I was wondering is if that would block the visibility to the applicant's proposed commercial sign there that you can see, which is, it's labeled number 11. I think that's one of the monument signs. Looked like with a double row, a staggered row of street trees, it might completely block the sign, but just curious.
I'm sure when we see the detailed plans come in that will be an important concern of them to avoid as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. I guess I'll reserve the other questions for the applicant. So thank you.
I had a question for Brandy. Is there any other precedent for the height increase requested? And could you walk us through the rationale for it?
Sure. To answer your first question, yes, I understand the.
Sure, Dan Descartes, maybe I'd be the best person to answer that question. I had some background back when the LUCE was adopted, and we went through and got these final documents through the council process for the LUCE. Just to give a little bit of background, when the LUCE was finally adopted with the City Council in December of 2014, this special focus area section of the zoning regulations was included for a couple of reasons. Number one was to make sure they didn't just get developed like any other site. The idea was that there would be eyes on these special focus sites, make sure that they get developed sort of to their potential, that the objectives of each area are looked at, and that the respective review authority has an opportunity to really look at those and determine that the development that's actually occurring there is consistent with those objectives for each area. And then the other idea was to ensure that there was sufficient flexibility to implement the objectives. So that section, especially there's a last sentence under the special focus area section that talks about the ability to, when there's a conflict between sort of the underlying zone standards and then the project that's implementing the design objectives, that when those things conflict, that the objectives of the land use element policy for that special focus area take precedence. So the idea was that the review authority would have discretion to be able to review the project, determine whether or not there's a specific design feature that may not meet necessarily the objectives of the underlying zone, but that better implements the policies of the special focus area. And that was really the intent of the section, to give the review authority the ability to still approve that project. Looking back at the findings from when the City Council approved or adopted the overall ordinance and resolutions for the LUCE adoption, there is some specific language regarding the special focus areas that really speaks to that. It talks about quite a bit of design flexibility. It uses the language talking about developing customized land uses and being able to afford innovation and design flexibility. So that's kind of some of the background on that. And I can just say as the planner that put together the special focus overlay section of the zoning regulations that clearly was the intent.
Thank you for that reminder. I was on the loose when we were talking about this. I was just asking if there has already been a precedent for this height increase, and I assume that we will understand what's the objective of getting these articulations. So if this is something that the applicant would better address, I'm fine to wait and hear that.
Sure. My apologies. I neglected to actually answer the direct question that you posed there. There have been some special focus areas where there has been design flexibility and innovation. Mostly it's been in the special focus areas that are also happen to be developed as specific plan areas. So San Luis Ranch, Froome Ranch, components of the Avila Ranch project. I'm not aware of another sort of special focus area where specifically flexibility has been afforded for just the height for a building. The applicant can probably give some good rationale in addition to the discussion that Brandy Cummings provided on how the additional height helps to provide some of the design objectives of the special focus area.
Thank you. Brandy, did you have anything to add, or shall I move on?
I think the only thing I would add is for reference, I believe the Cesslock building has some features that go up to 52 feet. So it might be a good reference in terms of how high this will actually be when it's built.
Yeah, I was wondering about the Cesslock. Yeah, thank you. So if there are no more questions of staff, are there any more questions from, if there are no more questions, if we could have the applicant presentation next.
Yes, let me pull that up. And from the applicant team, we have Carol Florence and Emily Ewer from Oasis Associates.
Good evening. So just a matter of technical. So Brandy, you're going to be my Vanna White this evening?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Good evening, Chair Dandekar, members of the Planning Commission. I am Carol Florence. I'm a principal planner with Oasis Associates. I'm representing the project applicant this evening, NKT-TFB2. I want to thank you for your consideration this evening. Brandy, thank you for your continued work effort and assisting us to appear before the Planning Commission this evening. And Luke for hitting the refresh button on the traffic and transportation aspects in the area. I'd like to take a moment and introduce our team. Perhaps if there are questions of them, they will raise their hand and they will be allowed into the meeting. Ken McKentley is a principal with McKentley Mallock Architects. They also remodeled most recently University Square, and they are responsible for the design of the 3 commercial buildings. We have Brian Starr, who's the principal at Studio Design Group Architects. He is the architect of record for Dignity Health and the Integrated Cancer Care Center. As Brandy mentioned, Emily Ewer, our associate planner, and Paul Tompkins representing NKT-TFB. Since you have reviewed the plan set, hopefully, and listened to Brandy's presentation, I will try to be brief as I highlight the project. Next, please. This evening, I am respectfully requesting that you approve the resolution noted in attachment 1 based upon the findings, the addendum to the mitigated negative declaration, and the air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, greenhouse gas, noise, and transportation mitigation measures that are complemented by the 29 conditions of approval, with one modification request on condition 8 to read, excuse me, plan submitted for building permit shall reflect conformance with bicycle parking requirements, including provision of 40 short-term spaces. Just a clarification, we were required to have 37, but we are providing 40, not 41. Minor revision. Next slide, please, Brandy. By way of history, as you can read, bringing a project to fruition is a Herculean effort. Regardless, from a more contemporary perspective, last year the council approved the rezone from business park to commercial or CC, the amendments to the airport area specific plan, the environmental determination, a map, and the assisted living facility. While the project before you this evening was conceptually introduced to the council back in September, we actually lodged our application in November of 2020. So for a quick update, the public improvement plans, which Luke was alluding to, those have been submitted and we have responded to our first plan check comments. And again, just to be clear, those PIPs include improvements to Broad Street, Tank Farm Road, as well as the extension of Industrial Way, if you will, that goes behind Cesslock to the signalized intersection at Tank Farm Road. So next, please. Thank you. In response, direct response to the special focus area of the land use element, these next slides depict the pedestrian circulation and connectivity aspects into and through the site, and also to the assisted living facility to the west and to Cesslock to our north. The project does include a transit stop on Broad Street, separated bicycle paths, and related bicycle amenities. And again, thank you. I want to tell you how important it was for the design team to work with Luke on these improvements, because I don't believe that they had been incorporated into any of the programs yet. So we were a little ahead of the game, and we're glad that we were and that we could provide these accordingly. Next slide, please. This slide shows views through the site, and more importantly, the patio use areas. For example, at the corner, the hard corner of Broad and Tank Farm, there's a proposed patio area that's approximately 3,800 square feet and will serve both buildings 3 and 4, while there's additional patio space provided between buildings 2 and 3 of approximately 3,100 square feet. And I think everyone's realized after 2020 how important exterior patio spaces are. The ICCC building includes a drop-off and pickup area and an approximately 1,500 square foot patio on the southern side of the ICCC. And I just want to tell you how excited we are about that building. Our local oncologists are concerned about sending their patients north, south, and east and hoping to treat them here locally. That patio on the south is actually an exiting patio for people to take a little respite, if you will, after their treatment. So I think it was a very nice addition to add a green wall around that particular patio as well. Next, please. I think this slide hopefully puts in context the adjacent structure. So you can see the Cesslock, which is adjacent to and north of the project, Marigold Shopping Center to the east, the 7-Eleven Tank Farm building, which is another handsome example of Studio Design Group's work, and the Mind Body building to the south. Next slide, please. With regards to building height, the airport area specific plan allows buildings up to 45 feet in height with 3 stories, with additional flexibility being again provided by the special focus area. And as Brandy and Brian mentioned, we applied for and received a Federal Aviation Administration determination of no hazard to air navigation, which was important to the Airport Land Use Commission's conformance approval. Again, for context, the midpoint of the Cesslock building is approximately 52 feet in height. I also wanted to focus your attention on packet page 110, which is the addendum to the mitigated negative declaration. It has the objectives of the special focus area within the 3 bullets, and I think it does a very good job of underscoring why we're asking for this additional height. This next slide, hopefully you've had a chance to review the sign program. We especially like the ability to be very specific with our signage so that there is no question at the end of the day when actual buildings come through for a building permit. So if you haven't reviewed those, this is a good example of where monument signs as well as building signs will be located. And I appreciate the comment, Commissioner Wilken, about the sign on Tank Farm Road. We will make certain that since it is a double-sided sign, that trees are appropriately located so that is visible as well. I think this next slide is really the colors and materials. I think it was probably more important to the ARC, but just wanted to share that with you because I think all in all, the ICCC building is very handsome for many reasons. The smaller buildings, I think, are equally as attractive, especially being on the hard corner of Tank Farm and Broad and being very closely situated to back of Sidewalk. But we also feel that with the parkway and also a fairly wide planting area, that we will not only protect and make pedestrians and bicyclists feel better, but also settle the buildings into that corner. So with that said, I will just thank you for your attention this evening. Certainly your positive response and the approval of the resolution. My team is here to address any of your questions or comments. So if they are directed to either of the architects, hopefully they can raise their hand and clerk will allow them to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Florence.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Commissioners, do you have questions of applicants? Let me just call on Commissioner Quincy.
I don't have any questions.
Commissioner Shorsman.
Oh, yes, I do have a couple. I wonder if you could go back to the slide that showed the bike racks, the different locations of the bike facilities. Thank you. Yeah, that's perfect. Just wondered, I had asked staff about this and they weren't sure what the accommodations were being made for. I noticed that, for example, the bike lockers, or what would normally be considered more of a long-term bike parking, are kind of dispersed throughout the area, and some are not necessarily, understandably, next to entrances of buildings. So I'm curious what the safety, safety accommodations are around them, what the lighting is, is there security fencing to make those locations safe if they're not. Generally, when you're a cyclist, you want to approach a building, you want your bike to be parked somewhere where it's visible and you can get to it, especially after dark, where it's safe for you to get to it, to get in and out of a locker or a rack. So could you talk about what kind of lighting or safety measures are going to be around those locations, in particular, the locker locations, but also anything that might be planned for the other bike racks as well?
I'm more than happy to address that, Commissioner Shorsman. I did take a look at that, and I spoke not only with the architects, site planners, but also our electrical engineer. And there is a condition, if I'm not mistaken, that they bike racks, not necessarily the long-term have some sort of cover. So there's going to be lighting associated with those covers. They are as close as to the buildings as we can get them, but I think you are right about the lighting aspect. So we are paying special attention to that so that there would be very adequate lighting at those specific locations. So we have a number of bike lockers and a number of bike racks. And so we want to make sure that they're utilized, and that utilization really has to do with a functional design. I know it's getting lighter later now, but in the winter it is dark, and we're hoping that buildings 2, 3, and 4 provides some lively activity that people in the neighborhoods or even slightly out of the neighborhoods would like to bike to. So we provided what we believe to be the requisite bicycle long and short-term parking, and we're paying special attention to those uses. Again, I think that was part and parcel to the special focus area, is to make certain that we were paying that extra attention to the pedestrian and bicycle, folks.
And for people to really bike as transportation and be employed in these buildings, I'm just curious if there's locker or shower facilities in any of them that the employees or long-term bicyclists can use.
That is an excellent question that we'll bring forward. We don't have tenants for these buildings at this juncture. Many of the buildings that we have designed and constructed as of late do have shower facilities in them. Typically, I wouldn't say necessarily retail restaurant types of buildings, but more on the office end or mixed use structures, a la the corner of Santa Rosa and Marsh. But we certainly will take that into consideration. I wish we had tenants for these buildings, and we've already done that programming with them. But that's certainly on the laundry list of things. So right now, we have shell buildings, but we're looking forward, to having a mix, if you will, of restaurant and retail in buildings 2, 3, and 4. And we will certainly take that into consideration.
And is building 1 you have a tenant for, though? Correct?
Yes, and
Dignity.
Perhaps, Brian Starr, the architect, could be, hopefully he's on and he could address that. Brian's been Dignity Health's architect for a very long time, so I know that he knows their system as well. So.
If he'd want to respond to that, I'd be curious to hear his answer, and then I might have one more question for him too.
Yeah, I see him. I don't know if he's been let into the meeting.
This is Deputy Clerk Christian. I did allow him into the meeting.
So maybe, Brian, if you can hear us, maybe unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm here.
There we go. Brian Starr, thank you.
Yes. I'm sorry, what's the question?
If there was shower facilities or locker facilities planned for folks that use alternative transportation in the building 1.
Right now it's a shell building, but I believe as part of the TIs, it's city requirement that we provide showers for bike riders.
Okay. Wasn't aware of that, but thank you. And then since it sounds like you're a little bit of a dignity historian, and maybe you could answer this question. I from my understanding, at least from what I've seen of signage, sort of kitty corner to this, I think Dignity has a cancer care center. I guess it would be directly across the street from the Mind Body complex now, on the kitty corner to this site. Would this building replace that current cancer care center, or is that something different?
This building will include that function. Right now, that does only infusion, which is just a part of cancer care. In addition to the infusion, there'll be a clinic, there'll be education areas, there'll be radiation therapy, and regular exam offices where cancer patients are seen elsewhere.
Okay. And then, thank you. And then I think this is probably a question for staff, and Chair Dandekar asked a little bit about building height of surrounding buildings, but I wondered if anyone could chime in on some of the other buildings. You mentioned some features that are 52 feet on the Cesslock building, but I'm not sure how tall in comparison the Mind Body buildings are, for example, or any of the other surrounding heights.
Yeah, I know for certain that the Cesslock building is equally as high, and it's interesting. The business park, which this corner was zoned at one point, allowed us to go to that height. So when we changed it to CC, the standard then was lowered. So we were to change it back and call it BP, we would be within the development standards of building height. And I believe Mind Body is of equal height. I don't think it has architectural features to 52 feet. And what's interesting, the most interesting and attractive part of the Mind Body building is actually in the interior, so you can't see some of those higher elements. All you're seeing is essentially the side of the building on Tank Farm Road. But again, these are allowable heights in the business park zone, and hadn't we not way back when changed the zone to something else to accommodate, frankly, a grocer that we no longer have, we probably would have left it as business park, and we probably wouldn't be asking at this juncture for a height exception.
I think that's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you. Commissioner Wilkin?
Thank you. I do have a couple questions for the applicant's team, but did we skip Commissioner Jorgensen?
I thought I'd take him after you. I realized
okay.
I was
Fine.
not following protocol.
Okay, great. Following up with on the height issue, I did have a question for the applicant's team. Typically, I think a 3-story building could be accommodated within or close to a height of 35 feet. So is there something about the function of this medical building that necessitates going higher than 35 feet, or is it just for the architecture and the aesthetics?
This is Brian. I can speak to that. On a medical office building with the HVAC conditions and the some of the components that we have to include, 35 feet would be a real scrunch. The bottom floor for the radiation and such needs to be at least 15 feet floor to floor. So that's going to push us up north of 40. And rather than just make a flat box, the other elements are to give it some variety at the roof line, and frankly to screen the mechanical equipment that's on the very top.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question. So there really a large part of that height increase is due to the need for to accommodate the radiation facility, it sounds like, on the first floor. So that helps. Thank you. And I had one more question about the signs, in particular the ID signs on Broad and on Tank Farm. According to the sign plan, the signs go up to about 16 feet in height, which seems pretty tall to me for a monument sign. And part of that height is it looks like on the sign plan there's a metal sided structure that extends behind and above the sign that projects another 4 feet above the sign itself. So I was wondering if that is needed, or what the purpose of that metal siding area is. And I asked that in reference to one of the airport area specific plan goals for signs that talks about emphasizing simplicity and functionality. So maybe you could address that additional height above the sign itself.
Commissioner Wilkin, if I could ask the clerk to allow Emily Ewer to address that. I think she's raising her hand.
Am I on?
Looks like it.
Yeah, so regarding the signage, the design is taking elements and components of the building so that there's a cohesion between the sign design as well as the buildings. And the heights of the signs at 16 feet, we've had other signage in the city for ID signs, especially on major roads approved at that height. One example is University Square. With that redevelopment, the ID signs at that location are also about 16 feet. And especially on some of the busiest streets in town, it seems to be fairly within scale of the right-of-way. So hopefully that answers your question. The other thing too is the area above the tenant signs. While the shopping center hasn't been branded yet, that would provide a potential opportunity to provide some sort of branding and placemaking component to the sign.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like that the metal siding that I'm looking at that's above and behind the actual sign itself is aesthetic, and could it possibly have additional logos or something like that on it? Is that what you were saying with branding?
Yeah, either it wouldn't be additional tenant signage, but perhaps, the name of the shopping center or the commercial center once it's been named.
Okay. All right. Well, it just 16 feet caught my attention because it doesn't seem typical for a monument sign, but you did mention it. There was something similar approved up on Foothill. So, okay. Thank you for that. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner, Vice Chair Jorgensen.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. I just wanted to have a clarification question again. I think this is a very nicely designed building, and it's going to make a good addition to that corner. But I was unable to get the plan documents that you kindly had made for us. They just went astray. So I was looking at the section on page 60 of our plans, and it was really the only place that I could find that would give me some understanding of the heights. And so I see that we basically have 3 floors, each about 14 feet, 6 inches floor to ceiling. And then so that gives you about 42 feet. And then the additional requirements are for the extended canopy and the stairway blocks. And I just wondered, that seems like there's no stairway to the roof. So those are basically architectural elements. Is that correct or not? Perhaps this is a question for the architects.
Yeah, this is Brian. One of the stairwells, at least one of the stairwells, is required by code to extend to the roof. Mm-hmm. And of course, the elevator shaft extends to the roof, and we've incorporated the HVAC duct chases along there as well. And then, as you can see in the section, we've got the HVAC equipment as well. So again, I mean, we could make a flat box, but we've extended the elements that we need to, stairs and elevators up, we've added some other elements to that same height just for a variety, and that we don't have a flat box. And we feel like the additional height in key elements gives it a break from kind of a monotonous box look.
Mhm. And the 14 feet 6 inches floor to ceiling is required, desirable for this kind of medical facility.
It is. By the time we get all the HVAC and the ceilings in that we need, it becomes congested pretty quickly.
I see. Thank you. That's all the questions I had. I think if we could see if there are any public comments on this building, on this project. Deputy City Clerk, do we have any public comments on this item?
There are no public comments on this item. Let's just give them a moment to remind them that if they would like to speak on this item, that you can raise your hand, and then I will call on you and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. We'll just give them about 15 seconds to respond.
Thank you.
I see no public comment on this item.
Thank you. Commissioners, the item is back for our deliberations. Are there any comments, discussion?
I'll start it off.
I'll go ahead and, go ahead.
Commissioner Wilkin and then Commissioner Schulz.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank staff for the report and the explanations on the different issues, including the height issue, and also wanted to commend the applicant on the design for pedestrians. The last time the commission saw this project, I think there were some comments on making sure that there were good pedestrian connections within the project, and also between the assisted living facility and this commercial area, since this is a mixed-use project especially, and also connections between this site and adjacent sites like the Cesslock property. And I think the design of this project does all of those things, and it does it very well. So I commend the applicants on the design for pedestrian connections within the site and to adjacent sites. And actually, I think the pedestrian connections that we're seeing could be a model for future mixed-use projects and commercial projects in the city. I do think the project is generally consistent with all the plans and regulations, and zoning regulations, the general plan. There's the airport area specific plan. There's the focus area overlay, and maybe I missed one other plan. There were a lot of plans and the community design guidelines. So a lot of plans to consider for this project. I think it's generally consistent. The height exception, if you want to call it that, I think makes sense based on the need for the medical office building and the way it allows the amenities that are called for in the focus area for this site. And it seems to be compatible with the heights of nearby buildings. So maybe to get this rolling, I'd like to put a motion on the table to adopt a draft resolution approving the project based on the findings and conditions. I did have a couple of, one change to a condition, and this would be condition number 5 regarding landscaping. And my concern is that there is a parking area adjacent to tank farm that is, well, visible from the street, and where the headlights of parked cars could shine into Broad Street. So I would just add some language to condition number 5 regarding landscape, so that there's sufficient landscaping and or a berm adjacent to that parking area on on Tank Farm to screen the headlights of parked cars from shining into Tank Farm. And then the applicant also requested a minor change to condition 8 regarding parking, and I would guess I would defer to staff as to whether that is appropriate or not. I think it had to do with the EV spaces, but I can't recall now. So that's my motion, just to get things rolling here.
So
This
just
is Brandy. Perhaps I could clarify that condition
Yes,
that the applicant requested. Is that all right? The applicant was speaking to condition 8, which is relative to bicycle parking, and the way that condition's written, it's requesting 40 spaces. Right now the plans show, or I'm sorry, 41 spaces. Right now the plans show 40. Perhaps an agreeable revision would be to simply require that plans for building permits reflect the bicycle requirements that are in the zoning ordinance. As the uses change, that could also change the required number of parking spaces. So perhaps the condition could reflect that.
Randy, can you tell us what packet page you are speaking to? Is it?
I'm looking at packet page 29, and it's condition 8, which is towards the bottom of the page.
Thank you.
Perhaps staff could just read the condition as staff is proposing it.
Sure. I don't have exact language, but perhaps something like plans submitted for building permits shall reflect conformance with bicycle requirements as required by section 1720, I believe it is, of the zoning ordinance, and bicycle spaces shall be maintained throughout the life of the project for all, this is where I'm uncertain, for all uses as the uses change. What I'm getting at is, for example, retail and quick food service have different bicycle parking requirements, and so the intent would be down the road, perhaps if retail space converted or vice versa, that the parking requirements are maintained.
I'd be glad to second the motion as by Commissioner Wilken in the first place.
So Commissioner Wilken, you're agreeable to this addition to condition 8, and you made an addition to condition
5.
Condition 5.
And I'll be happy to repeat that if the clerk needs the language or rough language.
Is that necessary?
Thank you. I've got it. Thank you.
Thank you. So do I have a motion, a second to Commissioner Wilken's motion?
I was seconding, actually.
Oh, you were. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jorgensen seconds. Discussion.
Well, maybe I'll just.
I think you muted
Support
yourself.
the height exception. I'm certainly glad to see a cancer facility kind of all in one place. Things are very scattered right now. And I think the pedestrian and bike circulation is well thought out. It certainly meets city goals very well. And I'm really pleased with the exterior outdoor spaces available. I just am really looking forward to some creative uses of those spaces. I think that's one of the nicest pieces of this. Thank you.
Commissioner Shorsman, sorry, I had recognized you earlier.
That's okay. I'm happy to follow my fellow commissioners, Wilkin and Jorgensen. I would like to reiterate what Commissioner Wilkin said. I think that the pedestrian and bike facilities that are going to be provided with actually all three of the developments in this area and how they are connected together via pedestrian and bike facilities is really top notch. And I hope to see more of this kind of coordinated development going on. This is maybe a rare opportunity where we have three developments sort of happening, chronologically that we can do something like this, but I hope it's a good positive trend. I also think that obviously the Cancer Care Center is a huge community benefit to us. It would be irreplaceable, obviously. I guess my one concern is about the height, and a lot of commissioners have asked questions about the height and the need, sort of the form versus function. I don't have any argument with the value of having a 3-story building, and obviously this needs, we need a lot of space to care for these patients. And I see the argument about the taller building allows for a smaller footprint on the ground. But even though the CESLOC building has some features that go up to 52 feet, this is a large building that a lot of it goes up to 52 feet. And that's 25% higher than is really allowed for the zoning. So I do have concerns about the height. If they went through the trouble, if the applicant went through the trouble of rezoning and then didn't meet the height requirements, I'm kind of left wondering why. Not saying that I've decided to vote against it. I just do have a reservation about the height.
Thank you. Commissioner Quincy.
Thank you, Chair. I plan on supporting the project. I agree with Commissioner Wilkin and Commissioner Jorgensen's analysis. I think it's consistent with the general plan. I think it's consistent with the overlays, the various plans, as Commissioner Wilkin put it, and the community design guidelines, the zoning regulations. And I personally don't see a problem with the height. The explanation given for why it needed to be built that high made sense to me. So I plan on voting for the project. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm the only one left. And I did have questions about the height, but thank you, Brian, for reminding us all about what was sort of the intent of the loose. These special focus areas were seen as a sort of punctuation points on the urban fabric of the city, points which would be more dense, more animated, they would be more urban, really. And I think that there was quite a bit of discussion on these and really careful thinking about where these special areas could best go without damaging sort of the nature of the slow skyline and the sort of quality of living in parts of the city. And so I think that this design is really a good design. I really thought that the ways in which the Architecture Review Commission's suggestions were incorporated by the architects was very nicely done. And in fact, the building has the sort of look and the presence of the building is enhanced. So I think the process has worked. I'm really happy to support this project. And okay about the height. So are there any other comments? If not, we have a motion and a second. I think it's time to call the roll of the motion, Deputy City Clerk.
Commissioner Wolkin,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jorgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Quincy,
Yes.
Commissioner Shorsman,
Yes.
Chair Dandekar.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you. The last item on our agenda is staff updates and agenda forecast. Tyler, would you be giving those?
Sure. Absolutely. Looking out to the next Planning Commission meeting is on April 14th. We have currently 2 items. One of them is an amendment. It was a city-initiated project and funded to make some changes to the airport area specific plan and the Margarita area specific plan to remove some restrictions associated with childcare facilities and allow those to open up a little bit more, consistent with some of the noise contour updates that are happening with the airport land use plan. So that's a consistency, kind of a consistency update that we're taking forward. The other item is a minor subdivision that has some lot frontage exceptions. This is over on at 163 Serrano. And if anybody's familiar with that part of that street, it is kind of a unique street, and it's not, built out to current city standards. So there are some width issues to the street and some access issues. So that'll be before you on the 14th, and then looking out.
So we are ready to adjourn. The next regular meeting of the Planning Commission is scheduled for Wednesday, April 14th, 2021 at 6 p.m. via teleconferencing. Any decisions of the Planning Commission is final unless appealed to City Council within 10 days of the action. Recommendations to City Council cannot be appealed since they're not a final action. This was a recommendation, so I think the decision stands, and we are concluded. Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right.